Ja, frid och shalom vänner, och vi befinner oss just nu utanför synagogan här i Göteborg. Jag vill berätta en profetisk syn som jag hade ungefär ett år innan den 7 oktober. Jag befinner mig i stan och allting bara förändrades i ett enda ögonblick. Och det blev såna här skyltar som man hade under krigstiden vid Hitlers framträdande. Och det bildades grupper som spottade efter mig och vrålade nazistiska slagord. Men jag kom iväg och emellan alltihopa utan att skadas. Efter det så talade Herren till mig rakt ifrån himlen och sa: de har hatat mig utan orsak. Så det är tydligt att judarnas Messias, som vi kristna tror är Jesus Kristus, är en och samma person. Och då är det inte undra på då att psalm 2 talar om att detta vi ser nu drar över den här världen av uppror är först och främst emot Gud. Vi ska nu lyssna till en rabbin som väldigt bra talar om den andliga bilden. Att judarna är faktiskt ett vittnesbörd om Gud vart man än är. Gud välsigna er, så hörs vi vidare sen. Amen.
So there's something a little bit disturbing about the anti-Israel protests going on all over the world. And that is quite simply, I think everybody knows that if Israel wasn't involved and anybody else was fighting the Hamas in Gaza, you'd be lucky if you get 200 people on the streets for any protest anywhere in the world. Russia and Chechnya, with those Muslims being slaughtered, maybe 200,000 civilians were killed, and the Russians were not taking any attempt to avoid civilian casualties. I don't know, do we have a few dozen, few hundred protests here and there? You know, even what's going on in Ukraine. We had at one point some nice lights on buildings. You won't get regular protests of more than a few dozen people. What's happening with the Uyghurs in China? What's happening when Syria was 14 million people thrown out of their homes, hundreds of thousands killed? Now, a lot of people felt bothered and upset, obviously, right? But you don't get 100,000 raging guys on the street unless the Jews are involved in the conflict. I'm sorry to put it that brutally, but that's the truth. And in fact, you don't even need there to be lots of civilian casualties. Just take in May 2021, we had organised estimated 180,000 people protesting in the streets of London because there were 250 civilians. 250 people lost their lives. Israel says 200 of them were actually Hamas fighters. The Palestinians say maybe it was only 100. So for that 150 civilians, we had 180,000 people screaming jihadi screams all over. What is it about the Jews that provokes this horrific mass, this trigger? You ask anyone there, why are you there? Oh, it's civilian casualties. What is it that will get 180,000 people to travel from all over the country? What is it that will make them come? It's Israel, because Israel's a Jewish state. And that, unfortunately, is not new. Now, you might not like what Israel's doing in the conflict, but no one can argue that Israel wasn't provoked, that it isn't at tremendous risk as a country. It's got a jihadi organization sitting on its borders that has explicitly said it wants to do it again and again and again and endanger millions of civilians. I don't think any sane person can think Israel doesn't have a moral obligation to try and go in and fight Hamas. You might not like the way it's doing it, right? But you can't compare it to China with the Uyghurs, or Syria with its own citizens, or Russia with the Chechens. You can't even begin to get in the same league. And Israel's worked so hard for the last 2 weeks and successfully evacuated 1 million out of the 1.1 million civilians that Hamas has tried to use as human shields. So the worst attack and the worst things you could say about Israel possible, right, would pale compared to pretty much any conflict that's ever happened anywhere in dense urban environments. And yet those other conflicts can get a few dozen people. Israel, it's the hundreds of thousands of raging, screaming people hurling the worst possible insults, which they always do. Now, this is genocide because you've killed 20,000 Hamas fighters, or not even that number yet, a few thousand Hamas fighters, and some civilians have tragically died as well. Genocide, unbelievable, right? And that tragically has been the story of Jewish history. You see, anti-Semitism, the world's oldest and longest hatred, has almost never been people getting up there saying, we hate the Jews. It's almost always been, we want to tell you the Jews are the most immoral people on the world, right? And it can be almost anything. You know, when Jews at one point were moneylenders in Europe, Why were they moneylenders? Because they were largely banned from almost every other industry, couldn't own land in large parts, couldn't be in lots of trades, and the governments wanted them to lend money because Christians couldn't do it or whatever it was, and suddenly lending money became in some parts of the world like a war crime, like a crime against humanity. You're chasing poor people for interest. This is the most horrific thing in the world, and Jews were slaughtered because of things like this. Except that when Jews stopped being the moneylenders and others took over, like Italian banking families, suddenly it's a part of economic life. We don't have pogroms against Italian banking families. Now we hate you because you don't have a land. Ah, says Herzl, I got the solution. There's our old homeland. It's sitting half empty under the Ottoman Empire, which is beginning to crumble. Let's just go back there. There's anyway lots of Jews migrating there. No one will hate us. That's what they're telling us. Oh no, now we hate you because you went to the land. Maybe it was somebody else's land. It's an incredible thing. You're occupying other people's territory. It was a defensive war, 1967. 14 armies came to destroy us, and we drove them back and offered the land back for peace time and again. No, you're occupying that land. But they said no to the peace, which we want. We're happy to withdraw if there'll be peace. No, your occupation suddenly became a crime against humanity. Notice, not when China's occupying Tibet and Uyghur lands and so on, not when Russia's occupying all sorts of things, not when Morocco's occupying southern Sahara, not when the Kurds are being occupied by the Turks and by Turkey and Iran and Iraq and Syria and being horrifically treated brutally. No, but there's one war crime in the world, Israel, which is stuck in the West Bank until such time as it can get a peace treaty and withdraw. That's the crime against humanity. Even Gaza, amazingly, people call it occupied. It's a new definition of occupation. Everywhere else in the world, to be an occupier, you actually have to be there on the ground running people's lives. Israel's the only place that can completely withdraw from a territory and not be involved at all in day-to-day life, and it's still officially occupying. So why is there always a weird standard that Jews are held to? Why is it that whatever Jews are doing in the world, someone will declare a war crime? Why is it that Israel's the only state in the Middle East that would be called apartheid, when actually almost every other state in the Middle East is apartheid, and Israel's the only non-apartheid state in the Middle East? Israel's the only state where no matter what your race, no matter what your religion or lack thereof, you can vote equally, you can have representatives in the parliament, you can have people on the Supreme Court, you have Muslim Arab judge on the Supreme Court, Muslim Arabs in the Knesset, in the parliament, and every vote counts equally, and everyone gets the same right to go to the same universities and the same jobs, and so on. No other state in the Middle East has that. Every other state in the Middle East is apartheid except Israel. And that's the one that gets labeled apartheid. So the study of anti-Semitism is complex and full of dozens of papers all over the world, but there's one common theme, and it's this, is that for some reason the darkest ideologies in the world, be them on the extreme right at the Nazi racist edges, or be they on the extreme left at the communist and anti-state and anti-Western world, they always obsess about hating the Jew. Be they the extreme anti-all religion, be they the extreme radical jihadis, they will always obsess about hating the Jew. Whether it's a Hitler or his arch nemesis Stalin, whether it's Al-Qaeda or whether it's the modern Nazis, they'll all agree on one thing, that we have to hate the Jew. And when we see that the darkest forces in humanity and the darkest parts of human nature always try to hate the Jew, when darkness always finds an enemy in us, it raises the question of maybe there's something light that they hate. Darkness hates light. Maybe there's something about Judaism and Jewishness that evil hates. And that can feel terrifying as a Jew. That can feel, many Jews we're trying to get away from all this Jewish stuff, or at least we just want to be like everyone else. Why does darkness have to always come and hate us? And you'll see, of course, it is darkness that hates us. And because darkness hates light, darkness hates good. Darkness hates something the Jewish people have always stood for in humanity. And darkness fights by saying, you're not light. Don't make us feel guilty. Don't have this voice of goodness. You know what you are? You're dark. Let's throw the worst accusations at you. You're poisoning the wells in medieval Europe. You murder Christian children, the blood libels of Europe. You are the poor people draining society when we were poor. You are the rich people raping society when we were rich. You are the people without a land when we didn't have a land. You're the people who took the land when we ended up back in the land. You're the people, you're the genocide, you're every single crime you could possibly imagine gets exaggerated and thrown at Jewish people, and has done throughout history, because darkness wants to say, stop shining this light, stop being this light, you're dark as well. And that's why anti-Semitism has always been Jew demonization. If the Jewish people in Israel have to defend themselves, you can promise yourself that no matter how many casualties there are, And this war is going to be much worse than all the others that have been before. This is a war against Hamas's tens of thousands of fighters who are not going to surrender. They're going to fight to the death. So this war is going to have thousands and thousands of casualties, as we've already seen, and probably a lot more. If Hamas is going to have to fight to the death, if that's what they're going to do, they might have to have tens of thousands of their soldiers killed before Israel can possibly be safe and before the Palestinians can be free from them. But even in rounds of fighting where there was less than 300 civilians who were killed, you could promise yourself that there'll be nightly coverage, obsessive coverage of every single baby in Palestinian territory who's been hurt, who's been injured, who's died. You can promise yourself an obsession in the world's media, just cannot let go of this conflict. We have to show everything, every bit of pain, every Hamas human shield, and let's stop blaming Israel. And suddenly a trigger arises and erupts in the radical communists and the radical Nazis and the radical jihadists, and 100,000 people can make it to the streets of London, and hundreds of thousands who would never normally come out in a conflict, no matter how many hundreds of thousands of civilians are actually killed, will be on the streets with rage. Because darkness hates the Jew, demonizes the Jew. And as a Jew, this can feel terrifying. This can be like the most horrible. Why can't we? Are we doomed for the rest of history to have this happen to us? That no matter what we do, if we surrender, they'll come and kill us. If we fight back, they'll say that we're the biggest demons and want to kill us again, right? Is this a negative thought? And actually, I want to say, no, it's not. It's actually a really empowering thought. Because when darkness declares you as its enemy, it sees something in us that we don't see often in ourselves. I have enough light that Hitler wants to kill me. He said it explicitly. If he doesn't kill every single Jew, they'll start goodness and morality again. Conscience, he says, is a blemish the Jew afflicted on mankind. The Jew created two inventions, the Jew says, circumcision on the body and conscience on the soul. Somehow the Jew is associated in the mind of darkness with conscience, with the word of God, with the message of God that you can rise up and better. In the best parts of religions in the non-Jewish world, in Christianity and Islam, they love us and we love them, and people can work together and find the goodness in one another. But in the dark corners of humanity is the hatred of God's message and the people who are the first to proclaim God's message to the world. But that means if Hitler doesn't like me, then there's probably something really, really good about me. Potential that I never knew I had. And what is it about me? It's that I'm part of this incredible Jewish people. There's a light in the Jewish people that darkness is scared of, that darkness rages against, that motivates anger to come out in the streets with hundreds of thousands. There's something in the Jewish people that is a light that the good of humanity love and the evil in humanity hates. And if I can just take a step back and see 1 second, there's more to this faith I'm a part of and more to this people I'm part of than I ever knew. If so many historians can talk about the incredible contribution the Jewish people made, not just as individuals in Nobel Prizes, but in bringing morals and values that changed humanity. Ideas like peace, the first articulated with the prophets of ancient Israel, the ideas of every child having a right to life, even if they're born disabled, the first articulated being the ancient Jews, the idea that every child should have an education, the idea that we should judge a society by how it treats its weakest, the prophets of Israel, the Torah of Israel, the light that it shone in the world, the light that darkness always hates. And maybe we still have resources, not maybe, we do still have a light that darkness still hates, and we can tap into that, and we can grow more connected to that. And we can become more Jewish and do more good and more light and more love. And that is the antidote to darkness. When light is shining out of a corner of a room, there's a lot of dark. And the dark wants to come and kill the light. And when the light suddenly realizes, 1 second, I have something it fears, let me shine more light. Let me do more good. Let me give it what it fears most of all. Let me be more human, more good, more Jewish, more connected to God's message, to the message of goodness in the world. Let's do more of that. It suddenly becomes a source of such deep pride, as my wife's grandmother and so many others who went through traumatic things like the Holocaust. She was a survivor. And as she took groups around Poland and they talked about her experience, she said, there's one thing for sure. If you made me go back again, I would choose every time to be the person in the camp. The person who arrived on a train with more than 200 relatives, who half an hour later had only 3 or 4 living relatives. The person who found her own mother's bag as she was going through the clothes and her own hair that her mother had kept on her from her young childhood. I would rather be there, she says, than be the guards of the camp, the Nazi guards with all their wonderful food and life they had around us. I would rather be the persecuted good than the true perpetrators of evil. I would rather be the ones who all the evil people shout and scream the most horrific slogans at us. And I'd rather be those people of good who darkness hates than be them marching and shrieking on the streets of London, putting horrific stuff up at social media, raging. I would rather be the Jews who are scared of what their future might be in Europe and other parts of the world. I would rather be those Israeli soldiers desperately trying to navigate these little tunnels in Gaza, trying to minimize any civilian deaths while under rain of fire from all sides. I would rather be them than be Hamas. I would rather be them than be the radical jihadis. I would rather be them and be the Nazis. I would rather be them than be all those radical evils who are throwing everything they can against us. And to be clear, as a Jewish people, we don't believe it's just Jews who are good in the world. We don't believe it's just Jews who have a world to come. There's a goodness throughout humanity. There's a place for so many nations to live together in peace and harmony, even in disagreement. And there's a hope that we all have, that as that light magnifies from all the good in the human world, and there's been so many outpourings of good, it has not just been the 100,000s that come out to scream hate. There's been so many voices of good, so many people who really care, so many people bring out light. As that light grows stronger and stronger, even in a dark and terrifying conflict, even in one where everything is a moral maze, as we just try to do what's right, try to do what's good, we pray and we will see, please God, the day when the light outshines the darkness, when those poor Palestinian civilians will be freed from Hamas and all its filth and sickness, when the greatness in Muslims and Christians and believers and non-believers and all over the world, where the light shines, where the call of God shines, that I created you all in the image of God, when the voice of peace shines, and when we can all live together and become one, a humanity that we have been dreaming for thousands of years, the humanity darkness hates, and the humanity that lies at the very soul of the Jewish people. Let's rise up to the occasion, and let's hope that through the little light we bring in this terrible, terrible time, that we'll merit to see such light and goodness when there's no more wars in the world and no more suffering and hatred, and that everything we've been dreaming of for thousands of years, everything the prophets spoke of the world living together in peace, when the wolf shall lie down with the lamb, and nation shall not lift up sword against nation, none shall they learn any more war. May we merit to see that speedily in our days, and in the meantime, where we be so proud to be the people of light, the people that darkness hate, the great traditions of the
speech really took it to another level. He called on the Islamic world to unite against Israel. Now, it wasn't clear if he meant military action, but he said to the Islamic world, what are you waiting for? Seems to me that he's calling for a unified assault against Israel. Now, again, he may mean a unified Islamic diplomatic assault against Israel, but clearly these were incendiary comments by Erdogan. Not only that, he said that Israel is a threat to all humanity, and he called Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, a vampire. Other than that, it was a perfectly calm and reasonable speech by Recep Erdogan. But folks, in all seriousness, I've called Turkey under his radical rule. Remember, Erdogan is Muslim Brotherhood through and through. I've referred to Turkey under his rule as NINO, NATO in name only. And you can expect, if we're looking at this from a prophetic lens, you can expect for this to continue, for Erdogan, as long as he's in power, under his rule, for Turkey to continue to go into this anti-Israel direction. It's very sad because for many years before Erdogan took power in 2002, Turkey was a loyal friend and ally of Israel and of the United States. And remember, Turkey is no minor player in the region or in the world. They boast the second largest military in NATO, behind only the United States. So folks, this bears watching. I mentioned prophetically, and I believe as the chess pieces move on the board, that you'll see Turkey align more strongly with Iran and with Russia in these prophetic Bible times that we're living in. And the prophet Ezekiel lays this out, chapters 38 and 39. Funny name, I know, but a name you need to know. The war of Gog and Magog. And I believe that Turkey will be a part of that last days or latter days, as Ezekiel calls it, confederation that comes against Israel. Here's the good news. They don't get very far, and that's your teaser. I'll tell you, or I'll have you read up on it yourself. Check out Ezekiel 38 and 39, but
Det är makt i de hopknäppta händer. I sig själv är de svaga och små. Men mot all maktens Gud du den vänder. Han har lovat att svar skall du få. Bönesvar är på väg, änglar kommer med bud. Om det dröjer dock fram, det skall nå. För det lovade löftenas trofasta Gud, be till mig och du hjälpen skall få. Du som ber för ditt barn, dina kära, står i förbön från år till år. Om du tålmodets läxa måste lära, himlens bönesvar en gång du får. Bönesvar är på väg, änglar kommer med bud. Om det dröjer dock fram, det skall nå. För det lovade löftenas trofasta Gud, be till mig och du hjälpen skall få. Det är makt i de hopknäppta händer, när i frälsarens namn du får be. Månar livsloppet en gång du ändar, är vart bönesvar klart skall du se. Bönesvar är på väg, änglar kommer med bud. Om det dröjer dock fram, det skall nå. För det lovade löftenas trofasta Gud, be till mig och du hjälpen skall få. För det lovade löftenas trofasta Gud, be till mig och du hjälpen skall få.